Hello, friends. This is Kish again. It's been a while, I know, since I recorded a video after the US elections. It was a crazy mess, as you have seen, and it's still not resolved. So, anyway, today is a different topic. So, I want to talk about the Indian economy and also whether the current reforms that have been passed, which is the agriculture reform as well as the labor reforms, are these going to save the Indian economy and revive it back to its original shape or even beyond? The 5 trillion that Modi, Prime Minister, has been talking about, or where are we headed as far as the economy is concerned? Right, and to be really honest, I have been hesitating to make this video for a long time. You can see why, based on what I am about to say in the future. So I hope I had more positive things to talk about, but unfortunately the picture is looking a little bit gloomy, at least in the short to medium run, even though but there is definitely hope in the longer run for sure. Given the scenario, there was COVID going on, festival seasons were coming. Given all these scenarios and situations, people were already not so happy with the way things were. So I thought I avoided making a video. But I feel now that we are post Diwali, and hopefully we are at least getting a break from COVID, even if it is not a permanent end in India, because things are really bad in Europe and America right now. So at least this may be, I guess, a better time, and there's never going to be a great time, believe me, to talk about this stuff. And it's probably a good time that we start having a reality check of what really is going on, rather than, of course, what you hear in the news and what the media, buck media, as well as the BJP folks want you to believe, right? So we'll talk about the real stuff that I see coming to in the Indian economy in the coming years, not just quarters or even months or quarters. We're talking years here. That's what we'll be talking about throughout this video. But before we get to the current state, we have to first go back and understand the Indian economy kind of from a older perspective, from years ago, right? So let's start from there rather than just diving into today, because it's harder to understand today if you don't know the past. And I'm not saying none of you know about this, but kind of it is a prerequisite before we get into the things that are happening today. Right, so let's start obviously from independence. So, we were a poor country, and then we got Nehru and Indira Gandhi, who took us down the Soviet model of socialism and communism, really. But they didn't want to call it communism, but so they called it socialism. But really, what we had is government run, all gigantic, all these companies like HMT, ITI, HAL, BHEL, BEML, you name it, every single industry, and all these public sector banks and LIC. So everything was run by the government. We had pure socialism all over the place, wherein the government is going to tax you, we're going to come after you if you have a business, right? And they don't encourage you in opening or running any businesses. There is license Raj, there is quota Raj. Every single aspect of the economy the government wants to control, though they don't call it communism though. Right? And basically the people have simply no freedom as far as economics is concerned, and the only people who are able to provide large employment are these large public sector units. Though the argument given when these were started is private sector cannot provide the employment, they may not have the money to open some large industry and whatnot. I don't have to go through all these socialism arguments and or communism arguments even. So only the government can take care of the people. Other the private guy is going to cheat the poor guy. Is not going to provide the best service. So that's why we nationalized all the banks, right? Was Indira Gandhi's argument. Same way, a what do you call mobile phone or a telephone will not reach the poorest of the poor if private sector is allowed, they're going to cheat somebody and they're not going to provide the best service, and blah 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 was the argument why we had Indian telephone industries making all the phones in India. And then you had all these BSNL and whatever they used to call it back then, government guys providing the telephone services, right? So what did all this result in? These socialism policies. Not only was the Indian economy hardly growing at like 3% or less throughout the Nehru Indira years for the most part, plus the Indian people were so backward, and then there were all kinds of restriction on imports and foreign products coming into the Indian market. They were all completely banned. Like for example, we could not, there was no Coke when I grew up in India in Indira Gandhi's days, right? And none of the American products were in India, all were kind of banned. We only had to drink Thumbs Up and Torino and whatnot, just as an example. Similar is the case in anything else. And foreign companies were unable to invest in India, so we were completely closed economy. And over time, what happened is these public sector units, as you know, are completely inefficient. Everybody is just punching and lunching. The best example today to look at this is Air India, right? As to what happens in a large government run public company where performance is not what is required for you to get your salary. You get it no matter what. They have unions, they have politicians backing them, everything, and no matter how many losses you make, the government keeps covering the losses forever with never demanding any performance from anybody, right? And then who suffers is the customer. And the way they they used to stop the company from going totally bust is you just kill all the competition. You don't let anybody else operate anything, just like how Air India and Indian Airlines used to be. They were the only airlines allowed in India. So no matter how shitty their service, how horrible things are with them, you had no choice but you have to fly this only. And then no matter how high the prices, no matter what, right? That was the days of India under Indira Gandhi and Nehru that we had lived through. Yes, some people say there were so many benefits, people got freebies and we were poor and whatnot, and this was the only solution that we could have thought of at that time. Some arguments are even that we just came out of being colonized under the British, so we could not follow their model. We could not let foreign companies because we would become slaves again. So whatever, all these arguments we have heard, and I guess this has gone on for 60 odd years, all the way from 1947 to nearly 1991. Some people say things started changing under Rajiv Gandhi, but I don't really buy this story. I maybe slightly, yeah, I remember STD, ISD, booths coming up and whatever, little bit of revolution in telecom under this guy Sam Petroda, right? Whatever his real Indian name is, I don't know. He goes by this name. So, what do you call that? Was a little bit of a small positive, probably, in terms of thinking things moving forward and phone calls at least getting little bit more affordable during the Rajiv Gandhi days, I guess. But I guess beyond that, I don't see that we were in any great shape or any great reforms were undertaken under Rajiv Gandhi. But but though I was too young at that time anyways, so at least that's at least what I experienced by as myself. I cannot analyze those years in that great detail because I wasn't old enough at that time. But this was the impact, at least as far as we are concerned, in terms of what changed in our day-to-day life, right? So until 91, we were in this closed system, and what this also led to finally was the current account deficit and the basically foreign currency crisis, where India did not have any more reserves in the 1990s and 91, where we could not purchase even 2 weeks or just a few weeks of imports is all that we could afford. And the main reason for that is India exported nothing. We hardly produced anything useful that the world wanted. And so when we don't export, we have no dollars, we don't earn dollars or pounds or any foreign currency. But in order to purchase anything in the market, like especially oil or any goods which is not in India and which India needs, you have to pay in the dollar or in the pound or in the any currency, any other currency which the world accepts. You cannot pay with rupees to buy dollars from Saudi Arabia, right? Things might have changed a little bit today, but back then India was a socialistic country with no real power and backward and poor, and nobody listened, or India did not have any such influencing power in the world, and nobody accepted your currency. So, and we had a shutdown economy with socialism and communism all over, with barely any growth and barely any production or private enterprise. So we produce nothing to export. So this was the status of India until Narsim Rao luckily became the Prime Minister of India. So I don't know if Rajiv Gandhi himself had lived and became the Prime Minister again, would India be the way it is today? I doubt it, that Rajiv Gandhi was in favor or willing to do these type of reforms. So in any case, that is it's now we can't go back there and change things. So we got lucky somehow that for whatever, due to however ways, unfortunate though, that finally Narsim Rao became the Prime Minister of India, right? And things started changing for India in towards the positive once Narsim Rao took over in the midst of multiple crises. One is the crisis in the Congress party, with the Prime Minister himself had been assassinated. Plus we had this currency crisis where we don't have money to do foreign for trade with any country or buy anything. And on top of it, a bad economy with decades of socialism, and and the rampant unemployment and population growth. Things were definitely looking really bad, and and not very bright and very gloomy around the time when Narsim Rao came in to office in the year 1991. Right? But then as we all know this, I guess, I'm sure most of us have heard how he turned around the Indian economy. He got rid of not all, but a lot of socialistic policies of Indira Gandhi and Nehru, and even to an extent Rajiv Gandhi, without kind of blaming them about it, because they were like big stars of India who cannot be touched. So he started allowing imports. He opened up the economy for private enterprises, got rid of the license Raj, the quota Raj, and all these, vestiges of the Soviet Union. And maybe it helped that by 1991, Soviet Union had already broken up and into pieces, and we were in a unipolar world with only US as the only remaining superpower. And you can say by that capitalism had won over socialism in their Cold War, right? Or in not socialism but communism. So I guess we didn't have as much pressure from Soviet Union in order to make these reforms. I guess maybe that's also a reason. So finally we started embarking on this reform. And also at that time, as things had it, there was also the up and coming information revolution that was going on. Internet was barely new, computers were new back then, and India had the talent and the manpower as well in abundance, plus the science and math education that almost is kind of unparalleled in the world, in the kind of numbers and the rigor and the intensity with which Indians pursue this education, which is simply amazing. But then those were being wasted. Even they were doing this even before Narsim Rao came to the picture, back in since the days of Nehru, or probably even from ages before. But the problem was that those could not be channelized into something effective to build the economy thanks to socialism earlier. So suddenly things started changing from 1991, as American companies were now allowed, not just American, all world companies, but primarily American, were allowed into India. They could come in, they could invest, they could start opening up offices in India. And the rest is history. We don't have to go into all the details of what happened. So suddenly we started having private airlines, suddenly we started having private TV channels, suddenly we started having everything private, right? All the products that you never thought we could never get before, like a Coca-Cola or a chips or whatever it is, or a McDonald, all these started slowly coming into India as well. And also people started getting better jobs, better salaries, better lifestyle, and also better services due to capitalism and competition in the market. Like, for example, the best example you can think of is the mobile phone, though it is a later example than Narsim Rao, but we can just use it in this context. So today, even the poorest of the poor persons probably has a mobile phone, while back in the day of Indira Gandhi, where the government would produce the phone and government would give you the phone line, even the richest of the rich also had a hard time getting a phone connection. Right? In my childhood, I remember that even amongst our family, there were only like one or two people in the entire family of hundreds and hundreds of our relatives who had a phone line back in the 80s. And these were like the among not even just normal rich, they were like the ultra rich of back then. They were the only ones who had a phone connection at home. So this was the status then, and think of the status today in India, where there is a mobile revolution with everybody having a mobile phone. And why did that happen? And the cheapest data rates, with thousands, hundreds of companies or dozens of companies competing with each other to lower rates and improve service every single day for the customer. This only happened due to capitalism, and this was brought into India thanks to Narsim Rao for for the kicking off of the reforms and opening up India to the world, and starting to put India on the world map as a future power, as a country that is going to eventually earn its rightful place on the world stage. Right, so that is the reforms that were started by Narsim Rao, and its major impact, apart from bringing in all these various companies, private sector companies into different areas, the primary impact was in the software world, in IT services, where it started to put India as the go-to destination for all types of IT services and IT technology, IT resources that people can find. And the revolution that we have today in IT, wherein there is hardly any company in America today, or even in Europe probably, which does not operate in India, or which does not have Indian people working there, either as employees themselves or as outsourced vendors. So this entire revolution that we are today, where like Modi talks about it, we went from snake charmers to mouse charmers. This entire thing happened and was only because thanks to primarily Narsim Rao, of course with others coming after following up as well. Right, so we then, and GDP wise, we went from a 3% country with 3% GDP growth, that also with a lot of difficulty to achieve that, suddenly to a country doing 8% or odd GDP growth every year. Right, and our status in the world, the stature, everything started going leaps and bounds once we when we entered the 90s decade. Right, so that's as far as this is concerned. So then next we will talk about Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the first BJP Prime Minister, as well as Manmohan Singh, who came after that, and then slowly come over to Modi, and also talk about how things changed, or what we expected out of Modi and what we are getting and what we can think of in the future. So of course under Narsim Rao, the finance minister was Manmohan Singh. We'll talk a lot about him, when we get to his prime ministership. So after Narsim Rao, despite Narsim Rao doing all these wonderful reforms, to be totally honest, I guess most people did not understand the impact or what these all were until way later, including myself, I would say, because obviously, one, I was very young at that age. I was barely in my 20s, or hardly got to 20 when, Narsim Rao was almost done. Probably I was barely 21 or 22 at that time. So even myself, I did not understand the what do you call, the impacts or what he had done, only to realize all these things what has changed years later, right? And so anyway, Narsim Rao, who already was in a minority government and had to do all kinds of tricks, including what is being accused of bribing people, MPs, to retain himself in power. After all this, finally he lost the election, and there was a third front government, I guess, for a short while, for a year or two, with even Mr. Deve Gowda and I.K. Gujral as the prime minister, where nothing much really happened under them. Luckily, at least no harm was done. And finally, after a lot of struggle and on, Vajpayee, the first BJP prime minister, finally came to power. And initially there were all kinds of doubts and questions whether he can even stay for the first full 5 years, because initially there was only a 11-day government, and then there was a 11-month government, and then finally, but luckily, he was able to manage the minority coalition government again, and successfully be a prime minister for 5 years. And there were many accomplishments under the Vajpayee government as well. First of all, the main thing was, people were scared whether Vajpayee would start all these things that the BJP is advocating, whether it is Ram Mandir and Hindu Muslim and all this type of stuff, rather than focusing on what is really needed. So it is great that Vajpayee distanced himself from all that, and he was primarily focused on economic development and improving India. So he did the nuclear test at Pokhran, and which even Americans or KGB or whoever, none of them had a clue about. So India successfully tested the nuclear bomb and got into the nuclear club, which is a great accomplishment. And he started infrastructure projects like Delhi Metro, the Golden Quadrilateral. Things of this nature had not been seen, at least till independent India. I know that Calcutta had a metro, but that's from years ago, or probably even from during the time of the British, probably is when it happened. I don't think it happened in independent India. Right, so this a modern scale Delhi metro that was started under Vajpayee was kind of the first real world where India started to announce with all these things that we are arriving on the world stage. And by then, a lot of all these IT companies from United States and all had recognized India as a powerhouse, and they had started to set up offices in Bangalore and Hyderabad as well, right, as the primary two locations. Of course, now we have diversified into whole new areas: Chennai, Noida, Mumbai or Pune more and whatnot. But initially those were the main centers. Right, and so India started to slowly emerge on the world stage, under Vajpayee. Of course, a lot of thanks goes to the reforms under Narsim Rao. And Vajpayee, kind of, though he was from the opposite party, he carried on this forward. And his other main contributions were, he shut down a lot of these public sector units that were all, just making losses and a burden on the taxpayer, going nowhere. Like I remember HMT, ITI, there were a whole bunch. Like in Karnataka, for example, there was these Mysore lamps, there was the NGEF, new government electric factory, and you name it, dime a dozen left, right, and center. There are all kinds of sick PSUs, which all one by one I saw under my own eyes. All got shut down over time, and there was a massive. He even had a Vajpayee had a disinvestment minister, which was Arun Shourie for a while at least, right? Who is primarily focused on ending all the legacy bureaucracy and legacy garbage that we had piled up from Nehru and Indira, right? And yeah, there is a lot of opposition to doing this. I understand, but in spite of all that, being a minority government, a coalition government, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was successful in moving the ball forward in all these areas, and that's kind of when Bangalore started appearing as a name in the world, in world news for the first time probably since independence. Before this, Bangalore was a city that nobody knew. Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, Madras were the four major metros of India, with the name of Bangalore not really recognized anywhere else. And but this was the time when that started to change, right? And probably a few started hearing the name Hyderabad as well, only to which kind of became more no well-known name later on down the line into as the years went by. But this is time when Bangalore started emerging under Vajpayee, and India started getting recognized as a world power in at least in IT services, and also as an emerging country which is coming out of socialism and transforming itself, and heading towards capitalism and heading towards being a world power. So that was the contributions of Vajpayee. Again, these are all, there is a lot to talk in all these areas, so we cannot just go into those details on and on for hours together. So I will keep this short, and now we get to Manmohan Singh. Right, so again, under Vajpayee too, the economy continues to grow at 8% in that range. There could be ups and downs, of course, but primarily. And then what I remember under Vajpayee is that the inflation had suddenly come down, right? Real estate prices in those days, I remember there was a Harshad Mehta bubble under Narsim Rao, which had crashed, and then real estate prices had started going crazy in the late 90s, like 96, 97, that time frame, 98 even maybe. But then the prices had suddenly crashed, and then like real estate and all were at like sale prices all over, at least Bangalore, probably most likely rest of India as well, wherein people were like willing to give away at such a low price that even there were no buyers for these real estate, which just a few years ago in the late 90s, like I said, 96 to 98, were going for lakhs and lakhs of rupees. Suddenly, with no takers, I see from all the way till 99 to at least 2001, 2002, things were really cheap in India. India was a country where, me having moved to the United States around that time from 98, when I first visited in India in 2000, after having been in America for a year or two. So when I go to India, everything is cheap. I can buy clothes, I can buy anything, like jewelry, all this stuff, food, go to restaurants, do whatever I feel like, movies, malls, anything. Everything was cheap. Right, I was able to afford, like, for using the American dollar, a whole bunch of things. It's completely opposite to what it is today, where if you go visit India as an American, you feel like you're the poorest guy in the whole place out there, with everybody talking in crores and hundreds of crores and tens of crores. Whether you talk of property or whatever you talk of, this is the conversation there, which an average American cannot even dream of. What in terms of the prices that we talk about for things in India, right? It is gone so crazy out there. That we'll come to in a second. But under Vajpayee was the last time where I felt that there was low inflation and reasonable prices in India. Though I wouldn't say they were cheap as an Indian, but they were reasonable. It wasn't like the craziness that we have seen since, right? And we will talk very much in detail about the Manmohan Singh years before we get to the Modi years, as well as we look at the future of where I see we are headed from here on. So finally, in the year 2003, I guess there was a more. Vajpayee was so confident of his India shining, was his tagline of the development in the economy and what he had done for India, where world over the suddenly the name of India started to be recognized. That he called in election 6 months early, and well, what as a surprise to everyone, including probably Vajpayee himself and most of us observers, he lost the election in the year 2003 and 3 or 4 maybe, I'm not sure exactly. And Manmohan Singh came to power probably 2004, I guess. And Manmohan Singh came to power again, not necessarily with a large majority, but again a minority government once more time, with cobbling up a few other parties. And again, I guess in a way you should say that we got lucky and India was fortunate that Sonia Gandhi did not become the prime minister, because that would have been a disaster. And whatever happened, I don't know. There are a lot of stories and theories around why she didn't. But in any case, though, yes, we can argue about whatever the goodness, the badness of Manmohan Singh as prime minister, but at least we are fortunate that it was not Sonia Gandhi, because it was looking very much like Sonia Gandhi would be who it would be. But luckily for India, in this aspect at least, that it was not her, and at least we had a learned, smart, person who at least understood economics in Dr. Manmohan Singh as the prime minister, who was also the finance minister under Narsim Rao, and who had done supposedly all these economic reforms under him. At least that's what we thought when he came in. And the expectations were really pretty high when Manmohan Singh was chosen as the prime minister. And people, probably many of us, were even happy. Yes, we were sad that Vajpayee did not become the prime minister again, or even Advani, but at least we were somewhat hopeful that now that we don't have Sonia Gandhi and we have Manmohan Singh instead, maybe things may not get really that bad, or maybe there is something to hope for in here, right? And then we'll now get into a little more detail of the 10 years of the Manmohan Singh Raj, right? Those are very important, and we need to understand that in a lot of detail before we can understand the days of Modi Raj, as well as the current situation and where we are looking like we will be heading in the near future, or in the next few years that I see ahead of us. Okay, so we'll talk about that again in more detail as we continue. Continuing on. So before we get into the years of Manmohan Singh, we want to kind of think and understand the 10 years, the decade that was under Narsim Rao and Vajpayee. In my opinion, India was extremely fortunate. I don't know, the stars all aligned for us, or I don't know what it was, that we had these two people as the prime ministers of India. In my opinion, in the history of independent India, this was the golden period of India, wherein within a decade we transformed from a backward, poor country of beggars and snake charmers to a country of smart, intelligent, forward-looking, advancing, developing nation. The image of India, completely transformed just in a decade, since these people took the reins and kind of did away with the past so quickly and so amazingly, and even under a minority government which struggled to stay in power, struggled to get in power, and had to work with a dozen other parties for every single thing. So it is just amazing what they are able to accomplish, despite the all the negatives and all the problems with the democratic setup that we have in India. right? And so we and the but there was one feature though that was kind of different or missing in these two governments, that we have seen commonplace in every single government, whether at the state level or at the center level in India. And what is that? That is the focus on all kinds of freebies, free water, free gas, free food, free this, free that, which is the only way that people win elections in India, which is majority. It's always focused on caste and freebies, right? So candidate of the right caste have to be there, and then you have to provide the right amount of freebies so that people can enjoy that and start voting. At least in these 10 years, I'm not saying you just leave the poor to lurch or something, but we have to, for India to develop, in my opinion, we got to start towards creating jobs and creating livelihoods for the poor, rather than just providing them freebies so that they collect that and then come and vote for your candidate, whoever it might be. And that's how we keep winning elections, and but they never improve, or they don't go ahead in life, and they continue to stay poor, which is what Congress has done for say decades, since they have been in power, except under Narasimha Rao, right? So under these two people, similarly in Karnataka and in Andhra Pradesh at that time, those states were also lucky that we had chief ministers like S.M. Krishna and Chandrababu Naidu, who also did similar sort of capitalistic development and moved away from the freebie politics that is the most commonplace in independent India, right? And so these were those a decade where the freebie and caste politics sort of took a back seat, you can say, because both Narasimha Rao and Vajpayee were Brahmins, right? So they were of the upper class. Of course, you can say even earlier ones like Nehru and to an extent maybe Indira were also Brahmin, as well as Lal Bahadur Shastri. But though they were at least like really popular leaders, the face of Congress and whatnot, whereas these like Narasimha Rao did not come from any family or anything like that, though he had been in the Congress party. So we had Brahmins as prime minister, maybe to an extent not worrying about the caste politics, and mainly more than that is the freebies were not were not the focus, at least. So that was the significant difference and shift and the change in India, that these people, two prime ministers, the best in my opinion that India has ever seen, were able to produce. Right? Then we got into and probably, of course, that also became the reason for why Vajpayee and Narasimha Rao both lost their elections, because in India, capitalism is not what the electorate wants. They don't want development in this way. All they are looking for is a handout. Is who gives me the highest amount of freebie, I'm going to vote for them over and over, right? Like a best example of this is probably Tamil Nadu, where these both parties, AIADMK and DMK, who have been in power, the same guys for like 50 odd years. There is Karunanidhi on one side, and there were MGR and Jayalalitha on the other side. So these have been the only three people who have been chief ministers of this state for the last 50 plus years, barring like 6 months or a year in between, when for whatever reason they had to put a puppet in. So luckily, at least in the last few years, things have changed and all these people have passed away, and we have some new faces at least. Who is the prime minister who didn't belong to this cabal. But what has been the politics here? Yes, there is Tamil Nadu is an advanced state. It is doing well in GDP, but the politics is all about who gives the most freebies, right? And then all they are going to do is one upmanship on the other, as to if one guy gives color TV free, another guy will give washing machine free and whatnot kind of stuff. This is the politics that India has always had, which is, in my opinion, the one of the main reasons why we don't progress and stay backward, right? So anyway, coming back to Manmohan Singh, and probably that is the reason why both Narasimha Rao and Vajpayee, despite doing brilliant for India, lost their elections, and we came back with really Sonia Gandhi, who was really elected and bringing back the old Congress, and their socialistic policies were again given sort of a thumbs up. But luckily, that twist of fate had it, and Manmohan Singh became the prime minister in again another coalition government, and at least that raised the hopes of a lot of people that okay, we have a smart person who was also the one of the key reformers during the Narasimha Rao era. He was instrumental in doing all these reforms, so we can expect a huge amount or a big push towards further reforms, transforming India once again to a next level beyond what Narasimha Rao and Vajpayee had done, was what the initial expectation was when Manmohan Singh took office, right? So we will dwell or talk about both his positives as well as his negatives. I know positives may not be a lot, but there are some definitely that needed to be mentioned. Despite, of course, there is a whole mountain of negatives that we can talk about. We'll dwell on some of them, not every single item, because that's just going to take a whole day for me to talk about every negative that is out there, because there are so many. So let's talk about the positives to start with under a Manmohan Singh government. Yes, we were all disappointed that the pace of reforms were not what we had expected. There were hardly any reforms, to be honest, under Manmohan Singh that were serious in terms of capitalism, in terms of freeing up the economy, in terms of allowing capitalism in various fields of India, transforming India into a manufacturing center, a hub. Not much happened in most of these areas, but some positive things really definitely did happen under Manmohan Singh. And one of the biggest positives that I noted was the major push towards infrastructure, major push towards building modern day amazing infrastructure, which today we are all proud of, and which has propelled India to become at par with many countries in the other countries, whether it is in the West or whether it is in the Middle East like Dubai or Singapore or places like that. We can proudly match up with and say, hey, even India has infrastructure like this. And what am I talking about? I am talking about airports, for example, world-class international standard airports coming up across India in multiple cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, fixing airports in Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, not so much Madras. There's a different story. We'll forget about that. Chennai one, won't dwell into it. So, but these are all amazing airports that all came up under Manmohan Singh. And then metro projects, right? And the amazing metro that I have seen, one mainly that I've used in Bangalore, though yes, Vajpayee started the one in Delhi, but the metro projects be kicked off in multiple cities in India under Manmohan Singh. Similarly, the freeways across India, in various places. It was almost impossible to even imagine that India can build these hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of such freeways, right? And that was amazing. And then look at the malls, the builders, the apartment complexes that started coming up in cities, the villas. So all these things, and the malls started appearing all over the place, right? So the transformation of cities and the infrastructure was definitely a huge plus under Manmohan Singh. And this all, being able to do this, and irrespective of what governments were in the state, like take a metro, take for example Bangalore Metro. So you may not have the same government. It's not like a Congress government only was there in Karnataka when Manmohan Singh was at the center, even though it might have been a BJP government. And a metro rail takes, you have to do construction right in the middle of the city, right, all over the city as well. So imagine the kind of lawsuits and the hassles and all these kind of things that typically you would have to in trying to do any such project in India. But despite all that, I have seen within my own eyes like in places who moved their compound wall. Like for example, there was this race course in Bangalore. I saw them, they moved their compound wall like 100 miles inside, or not 100 miles, sorry, 100 yards or whatever inside, in order to make space for freeway construction, in order to make space for metro. Such things were unimaginable in India, because I have seen projects back in the 80s and or so when I was in school. What do you call, where you they start a project and then something after like a month or few months of execution, things get stuck. There are all kinds of lawsuits, and then years and years go by. When it just remains as is, the whole place is dug up, and that's it. They left it, because no further construction can happen until all these lawsuits are settled. Right? That was the India we had seen, where nothing could be done. And even if there is just a hole on the street, the hole sits there till, like, even if multiple people on the have fallen in and got injured or whatever, it doesn't matter how many ever complaints you made, whatever you did, nothing would change. That was how things were in India before this age. Yeah, though things started improving under Narasimha Vajpayee, but the real push in terms of infrastructure development, I felt, came under Manmohan Singh. Right? And similarly, in certain areas, Manmohan Singh allowed capitalism to flourish, though he did not do a lot of reforms. A great example to that is mobile phones. Right? Mobile phones had started to appear on the world stage. The technology was new around that time, or probably even around Vajpayee's time. But really, they got big, and they really started growing mainly under Manmohan Singh. And he could have done another Indira Gandhi and said, only the government can do mobile phone production, and we will put the lines, and whatever the hell, we will intervene in every which way possible in the free market and not allow it to function. Could have been the mode that he could have taken, but luckily for India, he did not do any of that, and he has freely allowed capitalism, at least in the mobile banking sector. And today we have a mobile revolution in India, where even the poorest of the poor is able to afford a cell phone. The rates are competitive, one of the cheapest in the world in terms of whether it is a calling or data or any of this. All this was possible because Manmohan Singh allowed capitalism in the mobile phone industry. Right? Of course, he could have done 1,000 more reforms, which we did not do. And obviously, so these are some of the positives. Yes, there was a ton of corruption in the infrastructure area. Sure, we will go into the whole negatives, quite in detail as to what are all the negatives under Manmohan Singh. But some of the positives that I wanted to highlight were these couple of items, right? So today, India started now moving. It had already started getting the notice under Vajpayee on the world stage, but now it started actually talking to the world and being able to see eye to eye with the rest of the world, wherein I have the same kind of infrastructure, I have the same kind of communication and technology as what the rest of the world possesses. So today I am at par with you, even if not in any way behind. So that kind of a statement we as Indians could start making only under Manmohan Singh, in terms of when these kind of enhancements and improvements started happening within India. Right? So the amount of freeways, the amount of infrastructure that I see that came up under Manmohan Singh is to me unparalleled. I do not see that it has come up under Modi too. We will discuss that in a little bit, though they talk about we are laying whatever 20 kilometers more freeway per day. We'll talk about all these claims in the section on Modi. But I feel that the transformation really began, and the amount of infrastructure, the phase of India started to change under Manmohan Singh in this area at least. Right? And of course, there are, let's now get into the negatives of Manmohan Singh. So of course, we all know the Parivarvad, we all know the corruption, We all know the inflation, right, and absolute inaction, whether it is against Pakistan terror or anything, and then him not speaking and being totally silent on any issues, never talking to the press, or even if he does, he doesn't have any answers, or things like that. So we are aware of all these major items, but what we are not aware is the problems created under the economy under Manmohan Singh, right? That to me is the one of the biggest issue. Apart from, of course, all these negatives that we talked, Parivarvad, corruption, inflation, inaction, and as well as being silent and not being expressive at all, and also being pulled and driven by Sonia Gandhi and all the other Congress guys within there, who would just simply not listen to Manmohan Singh and did their own thing, their own corruption and whatnot. And he also was too quiet and too ineffective in kind of reining them in, or even having his way and executing his reforms or anything, just giving in and doing socialism. So the days of freebies and all these started to return, thanks to Sonia Gandhi also having some control, I guess, with this Manegra, and whatever kind of freebie schemes, right to this and right to that and right to everything, free for everyone. All these kind of programs again started cropping back with Manmohan Singh, and probably that's what helped him in getting re-elected again in 2009, I guess. And not that BJP had any strong opposition either. Advani was already pretty old. I think he had passed his prime by then, in terms of standing up to Manmohan Singh and really challenging him. And given that Congress government had also gone back to partly to those freebies and the usual way of fighting elections, they were able to successfully return to power, which Vajpayee and Narsim Rao before them were not able to do, right? So the negatives of all these 5 things that I mentioned, I think they have been discussed exhaustively all over the place. So I will not go once again and spend hours or minute, and even 30 minutes going into all those details. I think most of you are very familiar with those. But instead, let's focus on the problems created in the economy, the huge bubble, right, that was already there when Manmohan Singh left office. It was created primarily by them, right? So what Manmohan Singh government did, even before 2008, but especially after 2008, when the financial crisis in the United States with the Lehman collapse and all the different banking and housing collapse happened, and stock market dropped whatever 50%, right? This started even before this, is just basically printing a whole bunch of money and flooding money into the system, right? This happened worldwide, and this, you can even say, is the Keynesian remedy whenever the economy starts going into a recession, or problems start into the happening in the market. The only thing they know is lower interest rates, print money, pump it into the system, so thereby you kind of give an artificial boost to the asset prices, right? So this was very rampantly done under Manmohan Singh, wherein money was printed all over the place, all kinds of bank lending, and which also led to all kinds of corrupt ways of lending money, and a crazy boost to the stock market, a crazy boost in the real estate market, prices going like 100 times even, or even 1,000 times within 10 years in certain places, like in major cities. Insanity, and also eventually these things creeping into the cost of food, the cost of everything, the cost of rents, whatever, anything that the human being needed to survive, were started to become expensive, because this is all a result of the massive amount of money printing that was taking place under Manmohan Singh, and deficit spending on top of all these, as it is to try to prop up the market. There is also the thing that he has to provide for all these freebies that he has promised all the voters, in order to get re-elected, right? So the amount of spending, the amount of loans, the amount of printing, everything went through the roof and unprecedented levels, causing, of course, a wealth effect or an inflation effect in both stock prices, real estate prices, and in food and commodity and all these prices as well along with it. And this kind of is a gigantic bubble that did not happen not just in India but across the world. It started spearheaded by the United States post the 2008 collapse, but the impact of it was probably way more pronounced in India in terms of real estate prices, in terms of stock market going up like crazy times. Like when Manmohan Singh took office, I think the Sensex was only around 2,000 or 3,000. By the time he left office, it was 25,000 odd, right, when Modi took over in the year 2014. So in 10 years, you had the stock market go up about 10 times, which is completely insane. And real estate probably 100 times or more. Things that were selling in lakhs, like I was mentioning in the year 2000 or 2002 even, suddenly now by the year 2013 or 2012 came around, were in crores. And you just cannot imagine the kind of price increases that were taking place, and people supposedly becoming richer and richer just by buying a plot here or a plot there, while the ordinary person who was not able to afford land or gold or anything like that, having it harder and harder for them to survive, with all prices going crazy, inflation going like skyrocketing, whether it is petrol prices, whether it is food prices, whether it is rent prices, whether any kind of prices shooting up, and a poor person becoming harder and harder for them to survive, right? So this was a gigantic bubble that was created by Manmohan Singh, along with a lot of these NPAs due to corrupt and inept practices of lending money from various private sector, public sector, all kinds of sectors have done the same thing, same kind of stuff, right? All this was the kind of economy that Manmohan Singh left. Though at that time the bank failures and things like that had not begun, and only thing is the economy had started to dip down. From the 8%, we had gone down to 6, probably even 5 or so when Manmohan Singh left office. So kind of the downturn towards what was eventually inevitable had started to appear under the Manmohan Singh government, but it had not really taken the full force and started to really cause major problems in economically as such, until that started happening more into the Modi term, right? But the economic bubble was already created under Manmohan Singh, and it was pretty ready to burst. So that was of course, though he did all his freebies, I feel by the end of the Manmohan Singh term, people were so frustrated, so fed up, so wanting for change, and so eager to throw this guy out, and like they were waiting for the opportunity. And at that time, Modi showed up kind of out of nowhere, because a year before, like even before 2013, not many people knew who Modi was, right? And we had heard he's a chief minister in Gujarat and he was supposedly doing great and whatnot, but the rest of India really did not know Modi. But when he came on stage and promised development, and he started talking about all the negatives of the Congress and presented solutions, presented things that the youth of India want to hear, right? How he is going to do development. There is one speech of Modi that I became a fan myself of what he was talking about, which is I think it was in the year 2013, probably a year before the election, right? At least a year, if not more, before the election of 2014. This was in May 2013. He went to the Sri Ram College in New Delhi, and gave a completely development oriented presentation where he talked about only what his vision for developing India was going to be. Right? It's about an hour or an hour and a half presentation. It is simply amazing, and that kind of hit the home run, hit every mark, every thought that I had in my mind, what all we needed was contained in that presentation. So it was simply as if Modi had read the minds of every Indian, and that is the kind of and we were already yearning for change. We were already yearning for somebody who would bring in, who would be an able replacement for what people had endured under 10 years of Manmohan Singh, whether it is in the economic development, whether it is inaction in policies, whether it is the corruption, whether it is the Parivarwad. We were totally, completely, absolutely sick of everything that the Congress had provided us, and we needed a change. And Modi was the right man in the right place, talking the right things to everyone in India, and that's why he came in with the massive mandate that he received in 2014 as the new transformer, as the new reformer, as the new developer of India that everybody still today looks at him to be. But let's then talk about, given the background and now having understood where India was when Modi got in, we'll talk about again some of the positives, or very many positives, of Modi, as well as some of the negatives as far as economy is concerned. And also then we will go into the details of what do we think, what do I see that is coming to under Modi in future based on the current paths that he is pursuing.